Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakumullah khair for that warm introduction. And I'm really honored and happy to be here. Obviously, this is meant to be a hands-on workshop. So I can see that some people are here, most of you are here with your spouse, which is a good sign. But I just want to reiterate one thing, though, even though this is meant to be a hands-on workshop, but ultimately, this comes under the category of a preventative workshop, or prevention as we call it in the field. The goal of preventative work generally is to facilitate education and awareness. Right? The reason that we Muslims are obligated to attain education and obtain education throughout our life is because with more education, we become more and more aware. And the person who has more education has more responsibility. The person who does not have more education has a responsibility to fulfill the obligation of obtaining more education. So no one is excused from it. That's important because most of us, I've been married for 16 years, I'll be 17 inshallah soon. And most of us when we get married, when we have our children, we have no idea what to do. You know, like the nurse hands us the baby and we're supposed to know exactly how to raise a child. Most of us are put into a marriage and we say, yes, I do. And we start to spend our lives together in the same house, and we have no idea how to deal with one another. Now, in the past, if you go back maybe a couple of decades, perhaps things were slightly different. We had an idea of what a healthy marriage looked like because we had different examples in front of us. We had our parents, we had our uncles and aunts, our grandparents, neighbors. First 10 years of my life I spent in Pakistan, so we had many examples in our community that we could look at. And as you grow older, you kind of like start to see the good things and the bad things. You start to recognize the healthy patterns, the unhealthy patterns. You see like the parents are fighting too much about this and the cousins are not, or the uncle and aunt is doing this and that. And then you start to develop some idea from it. Nowadays, unfortunately, especially with this generation and even for us who are in this room, we didn't have that kind of a vast experience. Most of our experiences were, and naturally human beings, we hold on to negative memories, unfortunately. So if we grew up in a household where there was a lot of tension, argument happening, those are the memories that kind of stay. And today we'll actually talk about how the brain works in terms of retaining memory and the negative memories and the emotional memories, because that's what comes up when we have our destructive fights. So I want to just start by saying that in the first few modules you were introduced to what a positive outlook means, how to think positively. However, most people come into marriage thinking that there aren't going to be any fights or arguments. There's no such marriage that I'm aware of that did not have any arguments. If we look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, the one who is considered to be the perfect human being, even he had arguments with his wife, or his wife would argue back. This is a nature of how human relationships work. So arguments or avoiding arguments or not having arguments is not a reasonable goal. I do premarital coaching, and when I see the young couple sitting in front of me, they're like very happy and excited, and I tell them, I said, you're looking at each other now and you're feeling this like emotion, these butterflies, and you're just like, oh my God, this is so cool. We're getting married. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with this person. And I tell them that I guarantee you there will come a time where you will hate each other's guts. It might be a brief moment of time that you will look at each other like, oh my God, what did I do? What was I thinking, right? That's a very natural part of marriage. Every marriage goes through that step. We call that the post-honeymoon phase, right? After you get married, you have a honeymoon phase. Sometimes it lasts maybe a few months, few weeks, maybe a year, maybe a year and a half, 2 years. I haven't seen it beyond 2 years. When the first baby comes in especially, the honeymoon phase is gone. The tensions start to come up, the arguments, the constant arguments, and then those arguments get rough and rough and rough. So I want to start out by comparing two different mindsets, okay? Because that's what's important here. We have to be realistic. A realistic approach is we're not going to have any arguments, okay? We don't fight at all. But a healthy marriage is the one where, if we read here, right, on the left side, we have a healthy mindset. We don't fight often, but we do get into arguments every so often. Our fights are never out of control. We can argue about something and then move on. A lot of time it's about superficial events, so it's not like it lingers or causes us to harbor resentment. These are keywords here. Worst case scenario, we might not talk to each other for a few hours in a way that helps us calm down too. I can't say it's ever been so bad that we didn't speak for days. I'll usually apologize and we can make peace pretty easily. That sounds like what a reasonable, healthy marriage looks like. If anyone here has anyone here ever looked at Gottman, John Gottman? You've heard of the name John Gottman, right? Have you ever looked at his research? If you haven't, you should look at his research. Phenomenal research. He has a lot of data points that he has extracted in his team, and those data points are very important. And one of the data points, either from Gottman or somewhere else, talks about a ratio of positive to negative interactions. Okay? So if you don't know this number, and if you haven't read it in the book, I want you to guess that in a healthy relationship, how many positive to negative interactions happen? Let's say if there's one negative interaction, obviously we want lower negative interaction. How many positive interactions would happen to counterbalance that one negative interaction in a healthy marriage? 5. Well, somebody knows already knows the answer. So 5, which means for every 6 interactions, one of them is going to be negative, right? Naturally. Now, what's more interesting about these numbers is that there's a ceiling to this. You might think that the more positive interactions, the better, right? Naturally, you think that. But that's not also good, because the ceiling to that is also, I think, around 10 or 11. If you have 10 or 11 positive and 1 negative interaction, that's actually bad. If it's more than 10, it's actually not good. Why? Because 2 human beings who come from different backgrounds, 2 human beings who have different personalities, different outlooks in life, different goals, different way of handling conflicts, they can't come together and not have any conflict. That's not humanly, that's not naturally possible. Now, what does the unhealthy mindset look like? Let's look at the bottom one here. Our last fight literally woke up everyone in the apartment. We were both screaming. There was no physical violence, but our words were like daggers at each other. He blamed me and I blamed him. We were stuck in this cycle and couldn't stop. In situations like that, it just becomes about not feeling defeated. So I just keep fighting. I feel like I have to defend myself. I want him to have a more humble attitude. He unfortunately does not. We become more nervous if we need to have a tough conversation. Now this sounds like you and your husband. Then again, this is not abnormal either, because a lot of times this is what it ends up being. Now, why do people go from a healthy mindset to an unhealthy mindset? Why do they go from a healthy 5-to-1 ratio or a healthy way of having arguments or conflict with each other to an unhealthy one? We want to uncover that, okay? And again, I just want to be realistic here. Most marriages, unfortunately, in this day and age, and there's a philosophical reason behind this too, right? If you look at the way the world is going towards, we're living in what we call this post-modern world, okay? And post-modern values, one of the major things that they attack are family values, or families. Okay, so it goes against the very ideas that are being produced right now if we have healthy marriages. You understand? It goes against consumerism, it goes against materialism, it goes against modernism. So we're fighting a big battle here, a big war here. One of the things that I do when I work with couples is I remind them of this very beautiful hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. And he mentions that, shaitan, like at the end of the day, he has this kind of like a check-in period with his followers and those that he has sent to do things. And he asked them, like, what did you do? And everyone reports something. And one of them says, I made a husband and wife fight with one another. I created tension and conflict between husband and wife. And he goes and he hugs him and says, you've done the best. Basically, what you did causes more damage to the world than anything else can. If a person murders someone else, right, it's possible that only 2 people are affected. It's possible. Maybe 2 families are affected. But when a husband and wife fight with each other, the repercussions, the effects of that can go on for years and decades. Most people that come to therapy, and when they talk about their anger issues and their problems and their resentments and why they fight and how come they don't have the awareness and they're not able to control themselves, when we talk about it, it goes back to their parents, it goes back to the parents' parents, and it just continues down the generation. So there's a big war going on, and there's a small battle that's going on in your own bedrooms or in your own households. You might think that I won the battle. I was able to prove her wrong. Look, see facts. Sometimes, I have couples, they record each other. Don't do that. They'll record it because they'll come back, see, I told you, let me play you that recording. This is what you said, right? So, okay, fine, you proved her wrong or you proved him wrong, but both of you are losers. Unfortunately, in the big war that's happening, both of you are losers. And we have to remind us of that in that moment you might feel like, oh my God, my ego feels so strong because I've done something. So how do we get to that? The first step to that, or let's look at these 3 steps here. The first thing is awareness. Okay, we want to have an awareness and know what's happening. Awareness within your own selves. Okay, a very beautiful saying that's oftentimes used in a lot of the tasawwuf literature as well, and it's used as a hadith. Could be a hadith, Allahu alam. Man arafa nafsahu faqad arafa rabbahu. Whoever knows himself knows his Lord. Okay, knowing yourself, finding yourself, being aware of yourself. And I don't mean like I'm aware that I'm 43 years old, or I'm aware that I'm what I just ate right now. I mean like to a level where you're able to recognize the patterns within yourselves. Okay, so if I asked you right now, this very moment, what are you feeling right now within yourself? Okay, do a little check-in within yourself. What are you feeling? Now, if you just say, yeah, I feel okay, that's not good enough. I want you to dig deeper. Are you feeling happy? Are you feeling sad? It is kind of warm in here, by the way. Is there a way to like change the temperature? Okay. I thought it was just me presenting and like somebody else is like fanning. Okay. That's true. The screen also emits heat. Yeah. It's about conflict, so obviously naturally it's going to emit some heat. Are you aware of what you're feeling? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you frustrated? Are you tired? Why are you tired? Okay, that's the next step. Why are you feeling sad? Why are you feeling down? Did something happen? Most people don't think about this. Something could have happened yesterday. Something could have happened a week ago. Maybe you got reminded of it today. But we have no idea. And then we are just feeling kind of down. We're feeling kind of sad. Or we might have stress, like we're coming home from work and we're stressed out. We come home and we're like, that stress is already there, but we're not aware of it. If we don't have awareness of it, we can't do anything about it. The reason psychotherapy works, part of the very early steps of psychotherapy, what helps people grow and develop and become better, is actually increased awareness. Part of the work that we do in Islamic psychology, we call it inkishaf. We help uncover things that are happening underneath. Okay, so if you responded in a certain way, if you got frustrated, what was happening inside? Right? If you're tired, what's going on there? If you're feeling some level of energy with your wife, but a different level of energy with your friends, what is it about that relationship with your wife versus your friends? What about your older son versus your younger daughter? Right? There are reasons behind it, and most of us are on autopilot. We don't like to explore those reasons. The second thing is, once we have the awareness of it, especially the patterns, what leads us to get into arguments? How did we get here? When we do anger management therapy, we help people become more aware of their anger level. Sometimes I tell them, like, imagine it's like a thermometer, right? It goes from like a 0 to 100. And 100 degrees is where you kind of blow up, like frustrated. Most people who have anger problems, they don't see that temperature rising. For them, they don't. If you ask them, like, what happened? I have no idea. I have no idea why I'm so, how did I get here? I have no idea. They'll name something, but you went from 0 to a 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 to 100, and you're telling me there's a part in between that you don't know what was going on? That's impossible. The only reason that happens is because we don't pay attention to it. So part of the work is, even in arguments within the Institute of Marriage, we have to recognize, how did we come to this point? What started this? Where did this come from? When she said this, did this remind me of something? Is this like a pattern? Sometimes it's like an old wound that gets pushed. And in marriages, we learn how to push buttons, right? We kind of recognize, if I say this is going to have like the biggest impact on him. It's going to make him so frustrated. So I know exactly what to say in order to get him to feel a certain way. So once we have that, then we have to accept. We have to accept, that conflict is inevitable. Okay, without conflict, there's no such thing as a marriage that does not have a conflict. There's a quote that I read in the book. It said, like, there are people who are married that you think are happy, and then there are people that you actually know. Meaning, once you get to know people, you know that everyone has these struggles, and the happiness isn't always going to be like over here. You have arguments, it kind of goes down a little bit, you get a little frustrated, but then you come back up, and that's how marriage normally works. In fact, the earlier when I was telling you that you go from having a honeymoon phase to like a marriage where there's a lot of tension and resentment, some studies say that can last for like years, like 4, 5, 6, maybe even 7 years. And then after that comes the second honeymoon phase, because you've gone through those struggles and that conflict, you've learned how to deal with one another, you have enough patience that you're able to now manage conflict. And then the third thing is how to manage and reconcile. So research shows, and Gottman talks about this, that the healthiest couples are not the ones who don't have conflict. The healthiest couples are the ones who know how to come back from a conflict, who know how to reconcile after they've gone through some kind of a conflict. And that's what we're going to learn, inshallah, today. So I know we have activities too. I don't like to do lectures, especially this time of the day, because it's boring for me and it's boring for you. But let's go through 2 slides of first learning how to be able to see differences as part of this relationship, right? So these are 5 tips, and I want you to think about how this applies to you. So first of all, as I said, no matter who you marry, there will be differences between you, okay? Now, when we say differences, what are we talking about? If you took 2 identical twins, those who have the very similar, their genome and DNA is similar, they grew up in the same households, and you looked at their personalities, let's say after 20, 30, 40 years of life, you will find that both of them will be different. They went through similar experiences. They had similar parenting, they had similar opportunities provided to them. Why is that? Because not every human being grows out to be the same type of person. If all of us were the same, life would be kind of boring, actually. If you married a person who was very similar to you, one of my clients said that he's been talking to AI about his problems. He says I wish I could just marry AI, which is, I'm sure it's going to be possible very soon. But I said to him, imagine you're living in a household and then you have an opinion and you say, I don't really like going to 6 p.m. lectures. And then your AI spouse says, that's right. That's a very wonderful point. I completely agree with you. Is that the type of life you really want to live? Is there any challenge in that? Is there any any way to exert any type of energy? There's no fun in that. The differences are there no matter what. Now, one question I want to ask, all of you have heard of personality development, right? That at certain age, some of our core personality habits, features are developed. What do you think that age is? If you were to guess, at what age is most of our personality almost nearly fully developed, you could say? Not 100%, but let's say about 80% developed. What's that? 40? Okay. Anyone else? 25? Anyone lower than that? Doesn't matter male or female. 19? 30. Okay. Okay. It might surprise you, the developmental psychologists, most of them say by the age of 5, your personality is almost entirely developed. 5, right? Unless you married someone before, which we probably shouldn't do that. Right? There's no way that you could have contributed to your spouse's personality development. Most of it. Now, that doesn't give an excuse. Some people think, oh my God, my personality is developed, I have no say in this. No, we're not deterministic. What I'm saying is that things like, for example, how organized you are, things like how your emotional attachment works with another individual. Today we'll talk about some patterns where some people pursue, some people withdraw. That comes from attachment. A lot of that was figured out at a very young age. Very young age. You had no say in it. And for me, if I was to be more generous with that number, I might say puberty. Let's go with puberty because it's a little bit safer, even from an Islamic perspective, we can say. But the point is that the first decade of your life, our lives, our personality, habits, core personality features, even things like extroversion, introversion, things like how organized we are, conscientiousness, all of these, are we open to new experiences? These things are developed. And now, personality can modify, but that modification requires effort. I'll give you my own example. Okay, hopefully I'm not being recorded. But when I got married, I grew up in a household with 5 women, four sisters and a mother. And as the only other boy, I had to do nothing in my house. So all my laundry was taken care of. My bedroom magically just kind of fixed itself every single day, and nothing to worry about, right? I put the socks in the dirty pile, and then a day later I'll come back from the clean pile. It was just amazing. Life was just so cool. And then I got married. And when I got married, I realized, and I was like, this is kind of weird. I should know how to do laundry. This is not something. Obviously, I went to college before that too. And when I went to college, by the way, on the weekend, I would bring in a bag full of laundry, on Friday night, and then Sunday evening, it was clean. It was folded. It was ready to go. It was amazing. So I got married and I realized, okay, I need to put some effort into this. This is crazy. Like I'm married, and we look at the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So I started making sure things were clean. I would hang my clothes. I would do my laundry. And I was like, I'm a changed man. Like, look, I'm like, people say you can't change. This is nonsense. I wasn't a psychologist back then, by the way. I'm a changed individual. So then what happened, one summer, my wife went back to visit her family. She was gone for like 2 months. And I'm sitting in my bedroom and I look around and I see how messy and dirty it is. And the clothes are not hanged and the things. And I realized, oh my God, I don't think I was changed. I was putting in effort because I wanted to make sure that I was a good husband, right? It required effort. But my core personality habit was that I'm not very conscientious. I never needed to be. I grew up in a household where conscientiousness was not required of me, right? So that's what I mean. Early on, experiences early on, they shape the way the person will be for most of their lifetime. In the research, they talk about, for example, someone who's not very organized can become organized if someone in their life has cancer, for example. They have to be organized with appointments and medications and things like that. But that requires effort. There's some motivation. In marriage, that motivation might be there in the beginning. But after the honeymoon phase goes down, right, guess what? You have no motivation. Why should I be different for this person who I don't even like anymore? Right? I mean, naturally, right? You have no motivation to do that. So recognize that all of us come from a different background. We have our own baggages, we have our own issues, we have our own personalities, we have our own love languages, our own attachment styles, and all of that contributes to our relationship, the way we enter conflict, the way we reconcile, and all of that is different for all of us. The other thing is that the differences that exist between us, a lot of times people take it personally. I'll give you a real example. I had a couple one time, and the husband was, I don't know where he was from. I think he was like North African, but the wife was Palestinian. And his complaint was that she yells at me. He says, I come home and then she starts yelling at me. And the wife says, no, I'm not yelling at him, right? This is how I talk. And in therapy, I noticed that whenever she would talk, her voice was kind of loud. And so now what we realized that when after some few sessions, he started opening up about his childhood, that his mother and father used to have this like yelling issues all the time, and his mother would yell, and that every time his wife's voice is raised, he's reminded of what was happening, and he responds the same way as he responded when he was a child. So the differences between the way they communicated, her voice was a little bit loud, he was more sensitive to loud voices. Even though she wasn't yelling, he would take it as, or his brain would interpret as if it is she's yelling at him, and he would respond the same way. These differences are those that we have to learn to not take personally. Now keep in mind, that doesn't excuse abuse. I want to be very clear here, right? Just because you grew up in a household where your father was violent and beat you does not give you the right to beat your spouse or your children and then call it, this is a difference of personality and she needs to appreciate it. That's not an excuse for it. I'm talking about things that where we can say there's a spectrum, and you can be on this side of the spectrum or that side. Like for example, we talk about extroversion, conscientiousness, being organized. There's some people who like things very clean and neat. On that end of the spectrum, there are people who we call like they're obsessive compulsive personality disorder. Like a slight change in their things and it just kind of ruffles their feather. On the other hand, we have people that are kind of cluttered, they're not very organized or whatnot. But then on the other extreme, you have people that are just dirty, right? They're just filthy. They don't shower, they don't clean. Now, those two extremes are obviously things that as Muslims we should not be, condoning, and we should not be expressing. Like being clean is half of our faith. We recognize that. But within the spectrum inside, you'll see all different manifestations. And those are the differences, what I'm talking about here. Those are the things that we have to not take them personally and recognize that the person that I'm married to comes from a different background. Number 3, what's even more amazing is if you were to inquire about the differences, if you were to talk to each other about the differences and become curious, instead of, why is it like this, you can say, I wonder what's behind this. Like, what's happening here, right? Not that, why does he keep leaving his shoes there or his jacket there? It's like, I wonder what's going on behind it. Like, it's possible that he grew up and there was no motivation to do that and he's not used to it. He might need some reminders instead of taking it personally. The other thing to recognize is that differences can actually help the marriages. Believe it or not, differences can actually be really good, especially when it comes to parenting. Because our children are not going to be like, there's no, when it comes to that healthy spectrum that I talked about, and I think you went over this in the past modules, that within the healthy spectrum, a child can grow up on one end or the other end or somewhere in between. And just because they are in that side of the spectrum doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? So an ideal child for us is the one who has taqwa, who has God consciousness. Those are the children that we want to raise. But when it comes to being a little like having a little bit of clutter issue or being a little bit organized, there's no such thing as like this is the ideal and this is not the ideal. In fact, children have their own strengths that we have to cater to. The last thing is that, and we'll do that today as well, that once we have this awareness, we want to be able to identify them, list them, and talk to each other how we're going to work together given these differences. Okay? Sometimes you might have to divide up the duties. You have to, for example, in my marriage, I'm an early person who wakes up early. Okay? So waking up is my responsibility. I set the alarms, I wake up the children. Now, is that a problem for me? Maybe at some point I thought it was, but it's fine, no problem. Because it's easier for me to wake up early. Okay? Now, on the other hand, putting kids to bed is my wife's responsibility. We've kind of divided that up. So we can sit there and argue, why is it that I have to wake up early? Right? Shouldn't you be waking up? No. Use those differences and use them strategically in order to strengthen the marriages. So what are some things we can do? Now here you have two sides here. They're not really in order that I should have put them in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to compare the left side to the right side here. So on the left side you see here under dues, situation-specific complaints. Okay. This is a problem that ends up happening in all of our relationships, not just marriages. That what we end up doing is instead of looking at the specific situation, instead of looking at a specific issue, we try to globalize the issue. We try to think that whatever is happening is a universal issue. So, for example, a person might say that, like when it comes to, I'll give you a good example. I had a couple that I worked with one time. The husband did not have a good relationship with his parents. And so the way he interacted with his parents, there's a lot of anxiety and tension, and he always had this felt like this uneasiness whenever he was present with them. And so, one time his wife said to him you tend to be a difficult person, just like you are with your parents. You're always so difficult, something like that. That's an example of how one situation, one example, one specific place where a person is being globalized, right? Now, this is bad. Like when you look at depression, for example, one of the things that ends up happening in depression is that a person takes a situation. For example, let's say if I'm bad at cooking, and I go to the kitchen and try to cook something, it turns out to be a mess. What do people who are depressed say? Oh man, I suck at everything. Like I'm not good at anything, right? Instead, what should I say is, I'm not really good at cooking, okay? I'm good at all these other things in my life. There are other things that I can be very proud of, very happy about. But this one thing about my life is something that I'm struggling with. So when it comes to this relationship with one another, and when we're trying to foster a healthy attitude, a healthy connection, don't be universal about it. Don't have global statements. Don't think like that. Always give the benefit of the doubt. If a person is struggling somewhere in one aspect of their life, you can always say, it seems like she has difficulty expressing herself when it comes to her needs not being met intimately, right? That's one very specific statement instead of saying she doesn't know how to talk. Do you see the difference between the two? The global statements, what they end up doing is they create this picture, this idea, this schema of the person in our mind that all future events and all future interactions are passed through that filter. And when that ends up happening, it ends up affecting the way we judge the situations. The other thing is always say what you need, what you feel and what you need. How many people have heard of I statements, right? You hear the things like use I statements. What does that mean, by the way? Why do we say I statements instead of like global statements? Instead of making like grand statements, always say I. I what? Can somebody give me an example? Where did you hear I statements? Someone raised their hand about I statements. That brother right there, back there. Yes. So where did you hear that I statement thing? It's okay, I can hear. We can hear him. It's
one of self-praising.
What's that? It becomes accusatory. Okay. So, okay, if you say you. So, for example, let's say that if let's see. Okay, if a husband forgets to buy his wife a present, right? Let's say there was some kind of an occasion, maybe, or maybe there was an occasion, and he forgets to buy a statement, and she's like, "You never really care about me." Okay, how can she say it in a way where she is stating what she needs instead of making this global statement about him? How can that be more specific? Do you want to try? Maybe I can ask the sisters to try, because yes.
She could say maybe, I wish you remember my, let's say, birthday, whatever, more often.
Okay.
Instead of using what you said.
Okay, I wish you would remember my birthday more often. And what about her need? What's the need there?
Yeah, I wish, if you could try to make me feel special.
I wish you could, okay. Now even take a step back from that. What is happening in the situation? What are you feeling?
I don't like when you forget it.
Okay, okay.
I'm expecting.
Okay, good. So in the I statement strategy and what you said earlier as well, the goal is what? First of all, the goal is to divert the attention to yourself instead of the other person. Because if you come at the situation where you never remember anything about me, you don't care about me, that makes the other person defensive. Naturally, human beings become defensive. There's research on this that they've done. In fact, they did with these teenagers, where they found was the teenagers, when you talk to them like this, they stop listening after like the first few seconds. Like the conversation doesn't go anywhere. The other thing is that in that statement, you have to state what you need. Okay? It makes me sad, or it makes me feel unwanted when you don't remember me in these special events. I need you to remember my birthday because it makes me happy, it makes me feel wanted. Okay? Now, you're still getting the message across, right? But that language makes a big difference. Now, does that mean the other person is going to take it in a calmer manner? Most likely, yes, but it's not always guaranteed. But what's important here is that the way we communicate, we're being mindful of. Sometimes when I do work with parents, I tell them, for example, if you're trying to tell your child the importance of doing homework and how it leads to success, okay, you can say it in two different ways. You can say, if you don't do homework, you'll fail, or if you do homework, you'll pass, right? Or you'll succeed. It's the same thing, isn't it? I'm saying the same thing in two different ways. But why is one better? Because the vocabulary in the person's head, the narrative is different. One talks about not doing homework and failing, and the other one talks about doing homework and succeeding. Okay? So that narrative is what's important. The husband is more likely to remember the next time, look, it makes my wife feel unwanted. It makes her feel like she's not being cared for. Rather than, I'm careless, I'm an inconsiderate person. Do you see what I'm saying? The narrative, the vocabulary is different. And if that narrative is internalized, then all future habits, all future actions go through the same narrative, the same schema. Okay? The other thing is, in those big statements, the global statements we talked about, or a lot of times people will insult or belittle. Instead of saying what you need, you end up insulting the other person. So not only is that they're not likely to remember or even change their behavior, now they'll become defensive, and what will people do when they're insulted? They'll insult you back. Now in Gottman research, if you ever read Gottman's book, they talk about this 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Do you know what I'm talking about? Has anyone ever heard 4 horsemen of the apocalypse in marriage? Yeah? No? Okay. So Gottman says that he looked at, again, 40 years of research, 3,000 plus couples. He said there are 4 specific behaviors that can guarantee a divorce. Okay, and he says he would listen to couples in the first 15 minutes. He could guarantee with 94% certainty that which couple is going to get divorced. And a lot of it had to do with how they started the argument, what happened during the argument. And he said these 4 things happen. The first thing that happens is criticism. That all argument starts with some kind of a critical statement. You never do this. You're horrible. You're lazy. Okay? It's not like I need this, it makes me feel a certain way, or even questioning, like what happened here? Can you tell me what's going on? It's criticism. So attacking the person, not even the behavior, not saying that, hey, you forgetting this, is making me feel this way. Instead, you're forgetful, right? Or you're dumb. Like people will use these type of words in marriages all the time. And when someone criticizes the person, oftentimes they respond back with contempt. Or even the person who's criticizing will use contempt. By contempt, Gottman means like rolling your eyes, like, oh, here we go again. Oh, I can't believe it. Okay, this is going to happen again. Like that kind of attitude. Instead of listening to the criticism, they respond back with some kind of even sometimes sarcasm. The third thing that happens is defensiveness. Okay, instead of taking responsibility, like ideally, for example, if I forgot my wife's birthday and I forgot to give her a present, and she comes and says to me, you forgot to give me a present, it made me feel really sad. Ideally, I should say, you know what, you're right. Like I probably should have done that. I'm sorry. This isn't my fault. I should have remembered. I should have put a reminder or whatever. It won't happen again. Let me make it up to you, right? That's taking responsibility. But if someone criticizes you, oftentimes you come back with defensiveness. Well, when was the last time you gave me a present? It's not like you remember everything. Right? That's what most people come back with. So instead of taking responsibility, you become defensive. So you have criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and then stonewalling, which is that you become so anxious and so stressed that you just shut down, that you don't respond back. Instead of engaging with the person, you disconnect. You're just like, I don't want to deal with this. You walk away, you go to a different room, you just don't say anything. You're like, okay, fine, whatever, and then you walk away. These four things, according to Gottman, can predict divorce, especially the second one, contempt, that he says, can predict divorce more than anything else. And so always start with what you need. This is what I need. This is what I feel. The third thing is having a positive view. We talked about this in the previous session, so I won't really go into it. That having husn dhann, talking about the behavior, not the person. Okay? Identify the specific behavior that you're criticizing, that you want to bring up. This is something that I don't like. What you did there, that really upset me. Okay? Instead of how you are. And then the last thing is have some kind of reconciliation strategy instead of shutting down. Okay? It's really easy to ignore a problem. Really easy to ignore a problem. I mean, just naturally thinking, like if you have physical pain, it would be nice if you can just ignore it, right? But what ends up happening is if you ignore it, don't cater to it, it becomes worse and worse and worse. Same thing in a marriage. It's really easy to just walk away, pretend it didn't happen, and then just kind of brush it under the rug, and then come back and then just hope that it'll never come up again. But that strategy never works. Instead, what we have to do is we have to have plan on how to reconcile and be able to reconcile in a way that is going to be effective, and some of that takes some effort. So how do we get to that point? Again, we're coming to our activity soon, so just give me some few more minutes. One thing is recognizing patterns. A lot of things that happen in a marriage happen because of some kind of pattern. The way we can understand a pattern is to first look at how fights or what fights are happening. So I want you to think back in your last maybe a week or maybe 2 weeks, and I want you to think about the times that you had some kind of conflict. Could be something really bad, could be something really small, and work your way backwards. So for example, it could be we had a fight about my kids' exams or kids' grades or the kids' school or education, right? Now, what you'll find is that 99% of the time, I guarantee you that the problem is not what you're fighting about. There's something else that happened before. There's an underlying resentment. There's an underlying pattern. There's a series of events that happened, or there's things that happened in the past that are being triggered, and that's leading up to that fight that happened in the moment. Okay? So try to recognize those patterns. And this requires a lot of tafakkur. This is not something that happens very easily, by the way. It requires you to sit, maybe pick up a pen and paper, write things down. Okay, what happened? What was going on over there? Not during a fight, by the way. Don't do this when you're arguing with one another. Let's grab a piece of paper and sit down. Later on, you sit down when you're calm, and then you identify the pattern. The other thing is, what I just mentioned before, that whenever argument happens, a lot of times people want to resolve it right away. In fact, one of the worst things you can do is try to chase each other. This happens very frequently, and I'm not trying to be sexist here, but a lot of times it's the female trying to chase the man, let's figure this out. We need to talk about this, right? Obviously, there are gender differences here too, but the tendency is to want to resolve things right in the moment, because we think that somehow we can come to some kind of a resolution, at this time, and it will just fix everything else. Naturally, now I said earlier I'm going to teach you something about the brain. There's a model of the brain, I think it's called the hand model or something, right? If you took your thumb and then you grabbed it with your fingers, imagine this is your brain, okay? Now, the way the brain is set up is that at the very bottom of the brain where you have the brain stem and that area is for our survival, okay? Breathing, balancing, things like that. And then you have where the thumb is. This right here is the part of the brain that has to do with emotions, okay? We call it the limbic system. There's the amygdala, there's the hippocampus. The amygdala has emotions, hippocampus has memories. Every emotion has a memory, every memory has an emotion, okay? And they call it I think they call it the reptilian brain or something. There's some term, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then on top of it is where you have the human developed brain. That's where all the thinking comes from, planning, organizing, executive functioning, wisdom. That's where this comes from, okay? When you're fighting and arguing, right, this part of the brain is always active, obviously, because we're alive and breathing. When you're arguing in a fight, what part of the brain do you think is active? It's this part right here. It's the part of the brain that's animalistic by its very nature. It's aggressive. It's got emotions. It's got memories, past traumas. Sometimes you're responding to something in the moment. It's actually something you're responding to something that happened like 20 years ago, and you don't even know it, okay? And what that activation of that limbic system does is that it physiologically arouses you. You get angry, heated up, you're sweating, your voice is different, your voice might get louder, your heart beats higher. Now, I want you to just guess, how long do you think it takes for a person who has a very high heart rate and activated sympathetic nervous system for them to calm down? How many minutes do you think? Minimum. 2 minutes? Probably 2 minutes, man. You got a good system going on there. You got to teach me those skills right there. An hour, 30 minutes. Let's go with about 30 minutes. Minimum, I would say I've seen probably 20 minutes. The point is, it takes time for a person to calm down, and that's required in order to engage in critical thinking. Okay, so you can't resolve issues, you can't come to a solution if you're in the moment heated up. That is physiologically impossible. I don't know of anyone in the world who can solve problems, who can critically think. In fact, when our sympathetic nervous system is activated, our pupils will dilate. We can't even see things clearly. Physiologically, you can't even see things clearly. How are you going to see things, speaking metaphorically clearly? You can't. It's impossible. So it requires some time to calm down. It requires that break, and that break is necessary. That's the time when you have to separate. Not separate like divorce. I mean, just physically go into different areas. Just say, you know what, I need some time. I'm like, right now, this is not a good time. Please, I'm going to go and we'll come back in half an hour and we'll discuss. But right now is not a good time. Unfortunately, that's the time when most people are trying to resolve their issues. No, come here. We need to talk about this. I had this one couple where one of them used to chase the other one used to lock the door, and then they would they removed the doorknob because they didn't want the door to be locked. It was a very messy marriage. It didn't end up in divorce. The ending wasn't good, unfortunately. But that time is required. Now, part of the work that we talked about earlier, the awareness, is going to help us recognize this. So, for example, if I asked you the question, if you imagine yourself in that thermometer I talked about, 0, 10, 20, 30, all the way to 100. Let's say 100 is when you're really upset, frustrated. Are you aware of yourself, where you are in that thermometer, in that gauge? Can you tell if you're at a 10 or a 50 or a 70 or a 100? If you can't tell, then you can't take a break. It's not that easy to do that. So part of the work for ourselves is gain that awareness, recognize, how would I know if I'm at a 10 or a 20 or a 50 or a 70? Because as soon as I hit some threshold, guess what? It's like if you ever study neurology, it's like action potential. It's like you reach a certain threshold and the neuron is going to fire. The same thing happens here, that you kind of go from 10, 20, 30, whatever that number is different for everybody. And then it's like you're gone. Then it's not going to come back down. Then it just requires time. So being aware of yourself. A healthy couple also is aware of the other person. They can see the sign in the other person. They can tell when my wife is getting frustrated. I can see that now his voice is changing, is rising, he's getting sweaty. I can tell that he's not really making eye contact with me. So I can see. And when you notice that, what do? You just kind of back out. You see, it's not a good time right now. The question that people come up with is that, but what if that happens all the time, right? You start to talk about something, things get a little heated up, you're like, okay, we need to take a break. then you come back like 30 minutes later, or an hour later, 2 hours later, you start again, and then it happens again. You come back the next day, it happens again. At some point, it will get through. Trust me. Now, there are problems that sometimes need outer, like people to come and reconcile, maybe therapy. Inshallah, most people don't have those issues. Those are very far and few issues. Most issues, you will get through it. And the beauty of this is that process of going and coming back and going and coming back, that's what makes a marriage healthy. It's not that you clear your problems. You're two different individuals. You will always have issues. But that process of engaging, disengaging, coming back, reconciling, making things work, identifying, the bids that the other person is making to come back to you, appreciating them, then having another problem, then coming back again. That's what builds the marriage, so that when you have a second honeymoon phase, which, by the way, the research shows that it's better than the first honeymoon phase. Why? Because you've gone through all of that. That's what makes marriages work. So learn to take a break, learn to disagree with one another, and actively engage in it. Come back. Don't just leave it. Just because now things are calm in the house, we're not fighting, I don't want to talk about this, because guess what? It's going to bring out more problems. Things are calm. Why would I mess it up? Naturally, you might think, why should I mess things up? Things are okay. But no, that's when you have to talk about it. Those are the times when you have to engage in it. One of the things I always tell my couples, and then I'll pause for a minute, is that do a weekly check-in with one another. Okay? Whether you have problems or don't have problems, whether you're in the honeymoon phase or you're in whatever phase, like I'm going to kill you phase, whatever phase you're in, sit down and have a conversation. Check in. How are we doing? Are there things that I'm doing that I need to do more? I need to do less? Is there something that's coming up in the next week? Is there something that we need to prepare for? Are there things that are being ignored, for example? Do you feel ignored? Is there something I can do for you? That type of check-in is going to keep the marriage going. That initiative that you take in investing in the marriage is going to help the marriage develop. And then in that check-in and in that coming together, ask questions, reflect back, right? And don't get lost in the details. Just look at the general feelings. Okay, so I want to skip to we already talked about this by the way. That what are the signs of physiological shutdown? What are the signs that you're getting really, really upset? How do you know that it's time to take a break? These are the signs of it. So let's go to our first activity, which is our exercise 3.1. And for this exercise, so one of the things that people struggle with is the couples that they don't know when to take a break. They just don't know that the other person needs a break. So if you go to page 56 on the workbook, I won't go through the introductions and signs. The instructions say, when emotionally overwhelmed or physiologically aroused, taking a break of 20 minutes or more can help you avoid destructive fights. With your partner, with your husband and wife, discuss and plan when and how you will take a break during an argument. In that table, you will talk about what will you do during a break. What's the duration of the break? What are the signals? And reuniting. So I want you to first identify what's a signal that you will use that you need a break. Okay? Now keep in mind, when we say a break, it's not an accusation like, you need to take a break. You're getting this way. I can see that I can tell in your eyes that you're getting, what Dr. Khan said, you need to go. No, it's okay, maybe a timeout, right? You can do that, whatever it is that we need. Or you know what, I'm going to back away. I'm going to ask you nicely. Whatever it is, identify a signal that, hey, we need a break. Then knowing each other, because you know each other better than me, how long should that break be? How much time do we need? That time should be enough where you're calm enough to talk to each other, but it doesn't have to be like you've forgotten what was important. Because a lot of times arguments, there are things that are important that are sometimes missed out on. And then while you're in that break, what are you going to do to calm yourself down? Some people calm down by just being alone. Some people like to be just left alone, and that's what calms them down. Some people like to not be left alone. Actually, there are many people who don't like it if they're left alone. They might say, stay in the same room with me, but don't go in a different room. I need you present. We won't talk. We won't, try to engage one another for whatever time that we decide, but I want you here. And then once you've gone through that, when will you discuss that issue again? Is it going to be an hour later, 2 hours later, 30 minutes later, or the next day? So do this as an exercise, just 5 minutes, less than 5 minutes, and then I want to know if some of you are willing to share. Okay, in the interest of time, we'll continue. Did anyone have an interesting signal? I want to know about this. This is a very a topic that I'm always interested in. Is there a specific signal that you use that, you can say, I need a break? This is one that people use all the time, like timeout. You know what I'm talking about when people say timeout, right? Okay. Did you come up with a way to let the other person know that they need a break instead of saying, leave me alone or something, Yes. Okay, just saying we need to take a break. Okay, good. There again. But that's the thing. I think the reason signal is more important than the words is because words are oftentimes used in a argument, right? So you might think he's still arguing, right? And that could be misinterpreted. Okay, so let's move on to the next part, which is really necessary because I want to make sure we finish before Isha time. Now, I mentioned before, so now what happens after you had a fight and you reconcile? You have to go back to the basics, okay? First of all, stick to the argument that just happened. Even though there's a pattern, even though this is not the first time you fought about this, don't bring up the last 20 fights in this, okay? That's not going to help. What that does is just makes the person frustrated. You always do this. Remember that time in 1975 when you did this and then your grandfather said this? People do this all the time. That doesn't help. Using I statements, talk about what you're feeling, talk about what you're experiencing, okay? I feel this way. I have noticed this. It makes me sad when you do this. What do you think? The other thing that people struggle with is listening, right? When you're upset, obviously you can't listen. Remember we talked about the brain thing, right? That listening is part of this outer brain that requires you to sit and say, okay, I'm going to pay attention because whatever the other person is about to say is important and I need to learn from it. That won't happen if this part of your brain is activated, right? But once you're calmer and you're able to engage with the outer brain, sit down and you listen. You just have to listen to the other person, talk about what they're saying from their perspective. When we do our listening exercise, maybe in one of the future sessions we can do that. And naturally too, by the way, if you ever get a chance, actually do this. Most of you, I'm sure, have kids. If you have a teenager or a child, ask them to talk about a topic that they like, maybe Roblox or whatever game that they play, Fortnite, and ask them about something. Hey, tell me something about your game. See if you can listen to them for more than a minute. It is very difficult to listen to people, especially if you don't agree with them, especially if the topic doesn't interest you, right? A lot of times when couples come back, it's hard for them to listen to one another. Now, that doesn't mean you let the person talk for 5-10 minutes. You let them talk for a minute, you listen to them. Okay, now I want to say something. I understand that you felt this way. You validate them. You always respond with a validation. You don't come back and say, why do you feel this way? You said this, but I don't agree with you. You say, okay, I can see why you're saying this. I can try to understand why you feel, like I don't care about you. But, however, then you say your perspective. Sometimes people think validation means you're agreeing with them, that you're just caving in and saying it's your fault. Absolutely not. The other thing that you also have to keep in mind here, which this slide doesn't say, is that you don't have to do a universal apology. Sometimes people come back, okay, it was my fault, I'm sorry, it's all my fault, I apologize. Okay, just to bring in the peace, they'll say it's all my fault. You take responsibility for the part that you played in it. Okay, the part that you played in it. If it's 10% of it, you take responsibility for 10% of it. If it's 90% of it, you take responsibility for the 90% of it. The other 10%, you need to express it. You need to let them know, hey, I agree, I should not have done this, I agree that I forgot this and I did this. However, but you also did this, and that's something I don't think you should have done. It made me feel, belittled when you did this, for example. Okay, so only take responsibility for that. And in that reconciliation time after the argument, you have to be able to look at their perspective. This is the struggle that most people have. This is why therapy works, by the way. People who come to us for therapy, psychotherapy, why is it effective? Why is it that people who are depressed, anxious, they're struggling with their marriages, they're able to get some help? Because first of all, we're present, okay? We're sitting there, our mind is not ideally distracted. We're not thinking about what's important for me. I'm thinking about what's important for the person that's in front of me. I'm listening to them. What the Prophet ﷺ used to do, right? When someone came to the Prophet ﷺ and talked about whatever they were on their mind, he saw something interrupt them. He went with whatever was happening with them. That person's problem might be like very silly, small thing, like the Sahabi who had a bird that died, right? Those silly little things, a little kid. And you have like the one who has the responsibility of the whole world on his shoulder. but he's giving him time and energy and empathy. That's the model that we have. Now, it's hard for us to be at that level, but we can always strive to be. So show that empathy. Listen to what they have to say. You don't have to agree with them. You can just say, okay, I can see where you're coming from. I can begin to understand. Okay, maybe I get it a little bit. Okay, don't fully understand it, but I get like some of what's happening here. But however, I also want to say this. That's the part that's really important. Now, a lot of times in relationships, what we have, again, don't criticize, don't demean, don't accuse the other person, because that accusation isn't going to bring in any growth. That's only going to make them more defensive, it's going to make them more aggressive. Sometimes it takes like 2, 3, 4, 5 tries for us to get to that point. The next thing that I want us to work on is identifying how we engage with one another. These are the 3 different ways that couples engage with one another, and you will fall into one of these 3 for sure. Okay? So, the pursue is where both people move toward the conflict. Okay? It's imagine 2 people with like really loud megaphones just yelling and screaming at one another, a lot of heat. There's not much respect. It's just like trying to confront all the time. They both have very strong personalities. No one wants to give up. Okay? The pursue, withdraw, and this is oftentimes where the wife tends to be the pursuer. I think there's a percentage somewhere in my notes that mentions there's research on this. And the husband could be the one withdrawing, but it could be the other way around. But one person is pursuing, one person is moving toward. They want a resolution, they need answers in the moment, and the other person is what? They're moving away. They need some space, they get overwhelmed, they withdraw. The pursuer pursues more and more and more, and the withdrawer withdraws more and more and more. Okay? That's the second one. And the third one is both of them are conflict avoidant. They don't want to talk to each other, they don't like it, the engaging with each other is really hard. That challenge of like talking about problems isn't one that they want to go through. They just go quiet, they stonewall each other. Okay? They're emotionally distant from each other. So as part of this exercise, I want you to identify for each other which one of these 3 you fall into. So take a few minutes. Now again, given the fact that conflict is normal, everyone has arguments, and you're going to fall into one of these 3, so don't be shy. How many people are in the pursue category? Okay, I see a few people. You don't have to raise it too high. You can, if you're a little shy, you can do a little bit. I can see it. What about pursue, withdraw? Okay, a lot more hands. What about withdraw, conflict avoidant? Okay, all right. Now guess what? Neither one of them is a healthy one. So if you're thinking you had the right answer, there's no right answer here. Because think about this for a second, right? If you're physiologically aroused, right, your sympathetic nervous system is activated, you can't think clearly, and both of you are in the same level, nothing's going to get resolved. In fact, it's going to get more and more aggressive. If one of you needs some space and the other one wants to engage, again, you're not giving each other space, it's not going to happen. The third one, the reason that one is unhealthy is because they just never talk about it. It's not like they're giving that break. You might confuse and say, well, we're just giving each other space. No, it's like, we're never going to talk about this. This is something we're just going to avoid, hope that it goes away on its own, and we'll just come back and pretend it didn't happen, right? So what's healthy is that you have a conversation, even if it's uneasy, difficult to manage and to handle, and then if it gets really like out of hand, starts to go down that direction, you take a break. You give each other the signal, say, okay, time out, we need some time, we'll come back to it again. We'll do it after 2 hours, we'll do it tomorrow morning. Don't let it linger for days. Days is not necessary. Usually I say 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, 2 hours. If you don't really have the energy, you might say, okay, maybe tomorrow, right? But don't let it go for like 2 or 3 days. It's not going to be helpful. And then you come back. You come back and you start and you see where it goes. Don't ever give up on that process. That process is really, really important. Oh, one thing I didn't mention, which is really important, is please don't ever argue in front of your children. Don't ever do that. I can tell you how many people I've seen, adults and children, who are unfortunately have their like lifelong psychological issues because of their parents. Only because their parents couldn't learn how to argue. It wasn't that they didn't argue. Again, I'm not saying they didn't have any conflict. They just didn't know how to avoid it in front of their children. Children are very sensitive to these things. There was a study that I read a while ago. I'll find the link for it, inshallah. And it said that they compared the brains of children who saw their parents argue or witnessed them versus those people who went to war. Similar type of damage was done, right? At the brain level, the same damage. You might as well send your kids to a war zone. Like, that's how bad it is. So don't do that. Now, sometimes what's even worse is some parents use the children in the argument. They'll bring the children into the argument, right? And that's not healthy either. So in that hand signal thing, one of the things you also want to use there is if you notice that there's a child present, a child can hear you, you just signal the person, say, look, I know you're upset, but let's not do this right now. Let's just go to our bedroom, maybe talk about it there, or let's wait until the child is not here and then discuss this. Sometimes that's actually a good thing because it helps you just calm down, and then later when you talk about it, you're able to handle each other in a better way. But please keep children away from this. The last topic, because we also have to break for Salah soon, that we want to talk about is the idea of how all of us have different ways of connecting with one another. There are some people who, or some relationships, where people are completely disjointed. This is unhealthy, obviously. And then there's some relationships where people are completely enmeshed with one another. Every single thing they do, everything they feel, everything they think has to be with the other person. Now, I don't want to be like this Western secular kind of person who says, be completely separated, don't even talk to one another. Or in the Desi households, typically, like especially with the in-laws and whatnot, everyone's just kind of into each other's business. Those are two extremes. You're going to fall somewhere in the middle, and that's just the way it is. Now, what helps is that when you are in the middle, you want to be able to learn where is it that I could help the relationship and where is it that I need more help from my spouse, okay? What are some ways that I want to be able to rely on my husband and my wife, and what are some ways that I may need their help? Sometimes people's ego comes in a lot and they don't want to seek help. One of the things that Dr. Human will talk about next week is intimacy. In intimacy, oftentimes people they don't want to bring it up. They don't want to ask, whatever, whether it's physical intimacy in your bedroom or emotional intimacy. But being able to rely on one another is completely fine. That's what a marriage is supposed to be. You're supposed to want to, help one another, support one another. Being completely dependent on one another, emotionally, physically, that's not healthy. Being completely independent of one another, having no connection, no communication, no regard for the other person, that's also unhealthy. So one of the areas that gets manifested, and this is where the last exercise comes in, is our domains of power. So recognizing what the strengths and weaknesses are and what areas of life do we want to engage the other person and allow the other person to have a power. If you empower the other person will empower you as well. We talked about healthy and unhealthy marriages. I think Dr. Human might have mentioned it last time too, is that the healthiest marriages that I've seen in my practice, in my life, and the unhealthiest marriages, the one key difference was in a healthy marriage, both husband and wife came in with the attitude that I'm here to give more and expect less. I want to empower, I want to make my husband, my wife feel better. Both, again, not one. Not that one of them thought this way and the other one took that power and then ran with it. Rather, both of them came in with it. So if you ask them individually, who does more work in the house? Who puts more effort in this relationship? They will always say the other person. Right? They will always say the other person does more. They will never say I do more. And the ones that are unhealthy are the ones who think they do more. Now the issue here is, even if you look at something like income, okay, let's look at income for example. If you say that I bring into my marriage, I was working with a couple just a few days ago, one of their issues is income. Both of them are high earners. And the issue is that both of them feel that I spend more money on this relationship. And my husband doesn't spend enough or my wife doesn't spend enough. Now, you can take something at a dollar value, even to that number right there, and still those two things cannot be equal to one another. A husband putting in $50,000 into a relationship and a wife putting in $50,000, those are two different things. They cannot be equal to one another. So there's no way that you can compare a person that does cooking versus a person that does cleaning. A person that does children's education versus one that does something else. A person that works full-time versus the one that takes care of the house full-time, right? So try not to equate the things, rather identify where the strengths are. In some marriages, you'll see that some people are better at organizing things. Some people are better at managing children, teaching them, doing homework with them. Some people are better at there was one couple that I worked with. This is premarital, and in our premarital we go through these like responsibilities, and we talk about, okay, I want you to identify who's going to do what. In the workbook that we have, we also have a categories that I want you to also look at. That in these categories, who's going to handle what? And in this one couple that I had, the wife said, look, usually I know it's the woman that does cleaning and cooking, but there's something about cleaning bathrooms that I just don't like. Like, I can't handle it. It's been like that. There's some issues. I'm very sensitive to bathroom cleaning. So the goal was, okay, if we're dividing up responsibilities, and let's say she's like, I'm not working, he's the one that's making money, I'm responsible for taking care of the house, but I can't do the bathrooms. So he says, okay, you know what, I'll take care of it, no problem. Like, it's okay. If I need to step in to help my wife out, not a big deal. Now, I'm not going to sit there and compare, well, hold on a second. It's her responsibility, this is her domain. So don't get stuck with these domains either. The house is her domain. The children is her responsibility. I've seen this with husbands all the time. They'll come home, that's her. Anything that goes wrong with the child, behavioral problems, is the mother's fault, right? Homework issues, grade problems, is the mother's fault, right? No, that's not how it works. Within those domains are going to be things that are also subdomains where you have to be able to divide and learn. In fact, even in education, it's possible that if the child needs help with math, maybe the mother is good at math. Or maybe she's good at science and she can help him with science, and the father's good at math and he can help him with math. Be able to learn and recognize those differences. So in this last exercise, and then we'll go for Salah inshallah, the idea is that highlight the strength and limitations of each other, consider the following domains, and there are others obviously you can add on to it if you'd like, and recognize who is responsible, who is the main person within this domain. Okay, identify that. Ideally, you should have a main person, and you should be able to obviously help that individual as well. So just do that as an exercise within amongst each other. Okay, Iqama is in 4 minutes, so I do want to finish off. The last thing I want to say is, which is really important, I forgot to mention one thing. In the research on conflict and communication, there was a research that was done, which is very interesting finding that I came across today, that looked at wound healing. They looked at couples that have conflict in a lab and how they communicated with one another, those who communicated in a negative way, in a positive way. What they found was that in a marriage where there's negative communication, there's a lot of conflict, unresolved conflict, even physically, like their wounds heal at a slower level. They have more infections, they have more colds. They get sick very easily. It affects your immune system. Right? And we're talking about the destructive fights, not the constructive ones where you have a conflict and you're able to resolve those conflicts. So, and the last thing is always make dua. Sometimes we forget the power of dua, the power of dhikr. Dhikr can not only calm you down, it can also protect you, your family from hasad, from things that are external to us sometimes. And within the context of this, domains of responsibility, always recognize that. Look at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, right? His first wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, was his boss. She was the business owner. She was the one that was financially more capable. There's nothing wrong with women being more capable financially or having that as the strength. And if you look at the Prophet ﷺ's life, in his life, he would go home and he would take care of things. He would take care of his family. He would clean. He would, like milk. He would sew and his clothes, things like that. So there's no one guaranteed thing that one person is supposed to handle, right? There are things that are physically sometimes impossible. For example, if you have a little baby and you have to nurse the baby, obviously it's going to be the mother. Mother can provide more emotional care for the child, but that doesn't excuse the father from not being present there. Okay? The father is the one who oftentimes is the one responsible for disciplining the child. That doesn't mean the mother can be too loose with the child, right? So don't get caught up in these grand things. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses. Learn how to utilize that in the marriage. And if there's an area that you struggle in, ask for help. If you can't ask your spouse for help, then who are we going to ask? Who else can we come to? So may Allah allow us to have healthy conflict, be able to come back together. I know some of you have questions, but we'll have Q&A in our last session, inshallah. And you can always email me. My email address is on HBKU's website. So if I said anything wrong, please forgive me. And inshallah, we'll see you all next week, I believe. Yes, for the next module. Jazakallah khair. Thank you.